The evening I drove my wife's closest companion home, I convinced myself that the most perilous outcome was a stretch of awkward silence. How dreadfully naive. Silence would have been an act of mercy. My name is Julian Vane. I was 37, 9 years into a marriage that felt like a well-curated museum exhibit, and still sufficiently foolish to imagine that a quiet drive after a dinner party could not dismantle the very architecture of a man's existence. My wife, Helena, was a woman who approached hosting not as a gesture of hospitality, but as a calculated maneuver of dominance. Our residence was always pristine when guests arrived, tapered candles standing at attention, the vintage red decanted to the precise milliliter, the jazz low enough to simulate effortless culture. There were always fresh lilies in the foyer, though she would inevitably critique my selection later, claiming the scent was reminiscent of a funeral parlor. That was Helena. Polished, socially impeccable, and perpetually, in the quiet spaces of our home, thinly disappointed in my failure to be someone else. That particular Saturday, she had invited 3 couples, and her confidant, Elena Thorne. Elena was the anomaly in Helena's orbit, the only one I genuinely admired. She possessed a grounded authenticity. She was warm without the desperate performativity that defined Helena's social circle, and she carried a wit that didn't demand the spotlight. She was the sort of woman who instinctively noticed when a guest's glass ran dry, or when a jest had crossed the threshold from humor to cruelty. They had been friends since their university days, a historical mystery to me, given that Helena collected people like decorative ornaments, while Elena observed them as if they were actually composed of substance. Throughout the evening, I functioned as the invisible infrastructure, cooking, pouring, and maintaining a practiced hollow smile, while Helena transformed me into a harmless domestic punchline. "Julian approaches life like a complex spreadsheet," Helena remarked, tilting her crystal glass with a practiced flourish. "If ever I need to calculate the precise rate of return on a failing marriage, he'll be the man for the job." The table erupted in polite, glassy laughter. I offered a muted smile. It was the reflex I had cultivated over nearly a decade. Elena did not laugh. She remained silent, eyes fixed on her plate, before glancing up at me for a singular, fractured second. It was not pity I saw in her gaze. It was something far more unnerving. Recognition. Later, while I cleared the dessert plates, Helena rested a hand on my forearm, her touch light but possessing the weight of a leash. "See? He's quite useful when he's properly supervised." The laughter returned. I mirrored it, and once more I caught Elena's eyes, watching me before she quickly looked away. By 11:30, the evening began to unravel into the lingering, hollow goodbyes at the door. Helena performed her final act of the night, accepting compliments for a meal she hadn't touched and sending our guests off with the radiant warmth of a perfect hostess. Elena was the last to depart. Her transport had failed her. "I can arrange another," she said, thumb hovering over her screen. Helena didn't even look up from the wine glasses she was rearranging. "Julian can drive you. It's on his way." "It's not particularly on my way," I offered, my voice measured. Helena's smile was a masterpiece of cold, controlled affection. "Don't be difficult. You enjoy driving, don't you?" I didn't, but I retrieved the keys. Elena followed me into the chill of the night, her coat drawn tight against her throat. She seemed transformed outside the house, less insulated, stripped of the polite insulation Helena's environment provided. For the first 5 miles, the car was steeped in a heavy, suffocating silence. The rain fractured against the windshield like shattered glass, and the streetlights swept over her features in rhythmic, pale gold strokes. She kept tapping her screen, locking the device, then repeating the cycle. "Are you all right?" I asked. She gave a sharp, unconvincing nod. "I am." I waited. She peered into the darkness outside the window, then whispered, "I'm not." I braked at a red signal. "Elena?" She rotated toward me, and I saw her hands resting in her lap. They were trembling. That singular detail shifted the gravity of the entire night. This was not a social awkwardness. It was a crisis. "Take me somewhere secluded," she requested, her voice barely a breath. The light changed to green. I didn't move. For a brief, irrational second, I misinterpreted her request, not because Elena had given me cause, but because I was a man in a darkened cabin with a woman I had spent years forcing myself to ignore. Then I looked into her eyes. There was no artifice there. There was only raw, unadulterated fear. "Where?" I asked. "Not your residence, not mine." She exhaled a shaky breath. Somewhere we can speak where Helena cannot overhear. My grip tightened on the wheel. Why would Helena need to be excluded? Elena looked down at her device. Because she is the architect of the situation. I pulled into the desolate lot of a pharmacy 3 blocks away. It was sufficiently illuminated to feel secure, yet empty enough to provide the isolation she sought. The rain rhythmically tapped against the roof. The neon sign above us hummed a low, erratic electric buzz. Elena sat in silence for a time, gripping her phone as if it were a physical weight. Tell me what is happening, I insisted. She shook her head. You will despise me for this. That is not an explanation. I should have disclosed this sooner, Elena. Her name sounded sharper than intended, and she flinched. The sight of her recoil made me feel a sudden, violent loathing for my own lack of composure. I apologize, I said. No, she interrupted, wiping a stray tear with a sharp, impatient motion. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. That is the entire problem. I stared at her, unblinking. She unlocked her device, navigated to a message history, and extended it toward me. I hesitated. A part of me instinctively understood that once I took that device, my previous life would cease to exist. I took it. The messages were from Helena. My mind struggled to parse them at first, then the clarity became searing. If Julian inquires, I was with you after the studio. Just state we had drinks. Elena had replied. Helena, I am uncomfortable deceiving him. Helena's response followed. Don't be so melodramatic. He won't inquire. He is far too trusting. Another message. Men like Julian are useful because they believe their loyalty is a virtue. In reality, it simply makes them manageable. The interior of the vehicle seemed to vanish, leaving me in a vacuum. I read that final line 3 times. Useful, manageable. Elena watched my features with the intensity of someone witnessing a building collapse. There is more, she whispered. What is this? I asked, my voice thin. She has been utilizing me as a false alibi. For what? Elena shut her eyes. When she reopened them, the shame there was not her own, yet she bore the burden of it. Initially, I assumed it was merely an affair. I detested it, but I convinced myself it was not my marriage, and I lacked the full context. Her voice cracked. Then, last week, she requested that I corroborate a narrative that painted you as controlling. I looked up from the screen. What narrative? That you monitor her movements, that you demand to know her whereabouts at every hour, that she requires witnesses because you make her feel imprisoned. I felt a hollow, bitter laugh rise in my throat. It was not amusement. It was pure, unadulterated insanity. Helena moved through the world as she pleased. I never checked her messages, never tracked her location, never demanded her passwords. Half the time, I only discovered where she had been because she was tagged in social media photographs days later. That is objectively false, I said. I am aware, she answered, her speed of confirmation striking me. She leaned in, not to seduce, but to convey the weight of her words. I know exactly who you are, Julian. Something shifted in my chest. I fought against it, but it was futile. Helena had called me useful and manageable, and this woman beside me was regarding those same qualities as if they were fragile, precious things that needed protecting. Elena reached for the device, and our fingers grazed a clumsy, accidental collision. Both of us went rigid. She pulled away first. I did not bring you here for that, she said. I know. I appreciate that. She hesitated, then tapped a file on her screen. An audio recording. My heart hit my ribs. Elena, I cautioned. Is that? She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the play icon. The reason I can no longer remain silent. The rain continued its descent in distorted, streaking lines across the glass. Elena leaned forward. Before I initiate this, understand something. Helena is not merely preparing to leave you, Julian. She is meticulously constructing a narrative so the world will conclude you deserved it. I didn't want to hear it. It was a cowardly reaction, but it was the truth. Text could be interpreted, tone could be excused, and context could be manipulated. But a voice is a prison from which there is no escape. Elena watched me. You do not have to endure this tonight, she offered. The irony was almost enough to break me. She had handed me the edge of a precipice and was still attempting to offer a soft landing. I do. I said. She pressed play. Helena's voice flooded the car light. Relaxed. The precise cadence she adopted after 2 glasses of wine, when her charm sharpened into a blade. Elena, I need you to cease this performance of Julian as some wounded animal. He is perfectly adequate. He thrives on being the good husband. It provides him with a purpose he otherwise lacks. Elena's voice came back strained. You are exploiting him. Helena laughed. That sound was a physical wound. I married for stability. Do not be so theatrical. My hand tightened around the phone. The recording continued. Does he know about Nathan? A pause. Then Helena, sounding bored. He has no reason to. Not yet. Nathan. I knew a Nathan, Helena's financial consultant. Tall, polished, and perpetually lingering too close to her. His hand always brushing the small of her back at social functions. I had inquired once, months ago. She had rolled her eyes and condescended to me about my insecurity. I had apologized. The memory tasted like copper. The recording persisted. And the attorney? Elena's voice was icy now. Helena sighed. I am simply being prudent. If this becomes contentious, I require people to recognize the pattern. Julian is quiet. That serves my interests. Quiet men are easily cast as unstable if one describes them with the correct vocabulary. The car felt as though it were tipping on its side. I looked through the windshield at the dark, desolate storefront, at the rain distorting my own reflection. Quiet men are easily cast as unstable. Elena stopped the recording. I remained silent. For 9 years, I believed the greatest sin in my marriage was a lack of affection. I had been catastrophically wrong. The greatest sin was discovering my wife had studied my gentleness and calculated it as a flaw in a contract. Elena reclaimed the device. I am so profoundly sorry, she whispered. I looked at her, then truly looked at her. Her mascara had smudged, and her hands remained unsteady. She was a woman who had stood on the razor's edge between loyalty and decency. And tonight, decency had finally won. You recorded this? She nodded. After she asked me to lie the first time? I didn't know what I was doing. I suppose it was evidence. A form of armor. Why wait until now to tell me? She flinched, but she didn't avert her gaze. Because you were married to my closest friend. She does not sound like a friend. No, she admitted, her mouth twisting in distaste. She sounds like someone I kept offering passes to because of our shared history. It was too honest to be comfortable. I turned my attention back to the road. How long? Elena grasped my meaning. With Nathan? I nodded. I am not entirely certain. Estimate. She swallowed hard. Months. The word hit the silence with the finality of a gavel. Months. I thought of Helena returning late, the excuses, the showers she insisted on before bed, the way she would kiss me in public and turn away before the gesture could mean anything. I thought of Elena during our dinners becoming more withdrawn, departing early, regarding me occasionally with an expression that hinted at a confession she detested herself for wanting to make. And then I thought of tonight. Her in my vehicle, her hands trembling, her request for privacy. Helena had engineered a world where even the person attempting to save me could be framed as the antagonist. What did she specifically demand you say? I asked. Elena closed her eyes. If an attorney ever contacted you, or if you ever questioned her calendar, I was supposed to testify that she was with me on those Thursdays. Dinner, the studio, drinks, whatever was convenient. Thursdays? My voice felt distant, as if someone else were speaking. Helena had been absent almost every Thursday for the better part of a season. Elena nodded. I never consented. Not once. I believe you. She looked at me with such startling intensity it felt like a collision. You shouldn't. Not yet. You should challenge everything tonight. I am. Then challenge me as well. I did. Her lips parted slightly. I returned her device. You are still here, I said. That provides more context than you realize. For a moment her features shifted, as if my words had breached a wall she had been fortifying for years. Then she looked away, blinking rapidly. I am not the protagonist of this story, Julian. That is incorrect. I remained silent for too long. You are here now because she crossed a line that you couldn't ignore. That holds weight. She shook her head. It only means I discovered my limits far too late. There was something so achingly decent in that statement that I had to look away. Helena would have weaponized that guilt, turning it into a strategic advantage. Elena, however, channeled it into accountability. That was the distinction. And the moment I perceived it, the internal structure of my marriage shattered. It didn't end in that moment, but it dissolved like a rope I had been clinging to with both hands, only to realize the fibers had been severed long ago. My phone rang. Helena! We both stared at the screen. Elena straightened, wiping her face with a quick, decisive movement. You should answer it. I'm not certain I can maintain the facade. You must appear normal until you understand your next move. It was pragmatic. It was also merciful. I answered on speakerphone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hello. Hello. Helena's voice was smooth, edged with irritation. Where are you? Are you dropping Elena home? You've been gone nearly 40 minutes. Rain hammered the roof. Elena stared at her own reflection in her lap. I kept my voice perfectly flat. The roads are hazardous. Helena sighed. Of course. Did she make things uncomfortable? Elena's head snapped up. I went rigid. Pardon? Oh, don't play the martyr. She has been erratic lately. I suspect she is simply lonely. Just drop her off and return home, all right? I have no patience for one of her little moral spirals tonight. Elena shut her eyes. There it was, the cruelty so effortless it masqueraded as mere personality. I looked at Elena, and something in my chest finally settled. Not desire that was for later, but a decision. I will be home shortly, I said. Helena's voice softened, the classic bait. Good. And Julian? You are sweet for assisting her. Just ensure she doesn't drag you into her own personal chaos. The line went dead. The silence in the car was suffocating. Elena let out a long, ragged breath, as if she had finally broken the surface of the water. I am so sorry, she whispered. I engaged the ignition. Stop apologizing for her. I pulled out of the lot, but I didn't turn toward her neighborhood. She noticed immediately. Julian, I need one final thing before I go home. What? Show me, Nathan. Elena went still. She unlocked her device again. When she handed it to me this time, she wasn't just offering evidence. She was granting me the final permission to cease believing in a marriage Helena had already burned to the ground. She showed me a photograph. Not merely a name, but a visual reality. A polished man in a tailored overcoat standing beside Helena in the dim light of a downtown hotel bar. The image had been captured from across the street through the glass, likely by Elena herself. Helena was laughing, looking up at him, her hand resting on his chest with a possessive, intimate ease. The timestamp was a Thursday. I stared at the image until the pixels blurred into static. Elena sat in silence. That was her signature. She didn't fill the void with noise or spin. She allowed the reality to exist in its own devastating space. I followed her once, she confessed quietly. I take no pride in it. I turned to her. Why? Because she was using my identity. If she was going to drag me into her deceit, I needed to know exactly what she was hiding. I returned the device. Our fingers brushed once more. This time, neither of us retreated. It was a brief moment, less than a second, but in that vacuum, I felt something profound. Not lust, but relief. Someone was sitting beside me in the wreckage, and they weren't demanding I pretend the furniture was still intact. Elena looked down at our hands, then slowly moved hers to her lap. I am sorry, she whispered. I opted not to tell her to stop. Instead, I said, thank you. That broke her. Just enough that I witnessed how desperately she had craved those words and how much she hated that she needed them. I drove her home, dropping her a block from her building. If Helena checks the security footage or contacts the neighbors, she paused and shook her head. I despise that I am so paranoid. You aren't paranoid. You are observant. She looked at me, saddened. Before you go, Julian, she will be incredibly sweet when you return home. I know. That is what she does when she senses the control slipping. She was entirely correct. Helena was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived barefoot. Draped in silk, a glass of water on the counter instead of wine, signaling a performative sobriety. There you are, she said. No accusation, no sharp edges, just a perfectly calibrated warmth. I stood in the doorway, my coat still on. She approached and traced a finger along my chest. You appear exhausted. I used to adore that attentiveness. Now, I simply wondered what she was calculating. It was a long night, I said. She sighed. Elena can be quite taxing. I understand she means well, but she becomes so dramatic when she is lonely. There it was again. The poisoned gift, presented as concern. She seemed distressed, I noted. Helena's mouth curved. She is perpetually distressed about something. You are far too kind, Julian. Women like Elena perceive that and capitalize on it. Women like Elena. I thought of Elena, trembling in my car because she had chosen integrity over 20 years of history. I thought of Helena, laughing in that recording while describing my loyalty as a strategic asset. For the first time in 9 years, my wife touched me, and I felt nothing but a vast, insurmountable distance. She leaned in to kiss me. I tilted my head just enough that her lips grazed my cheek. Her hand remained on my chest, motionless. That was the first fracture she sensed. Is everything all right? She asked. I studied her exquisite face, the face I had trusted, the face that had mastered the art of softening just enough to ensure I remained manageable. I am exhausted, I replied. I walked to the guest room and turned the lock. The following morning, I didn't go to the office. I called in sick, a rarity in 3 years, and sat at the dining table after Helena left for her Pilates class. I opened every file I had spent years ignoring, because I had mistaken my trust for a virtue. Bank statements, digital logs, shared calendar histories. By noon, the narrative was complete. A boutique hotel transaction on a Thursday. A retainer payment to a high-end divorce firm. 2 illicit transfers from our joint savings into a private account. A transaction at a high-end menswear boutique 2 days prior to Nathan's birthday. It wasn't a singular cinematic revelation, it was a pattern. The marriage hadn't collapsed overnight. It had been systematically dismantled while I was bringing in the groceries, repairing the cabinets, and smiling at dinners where my wife mocked my utility to her friends. At 2:13, a message arrived from Elena. Are you safe? Not are you okay? But times safe. That single word confirmed she understood Helena's pathology better than I had dared to admit. I typed back, I found the records. The hotel, the account, the firm. She waited nearly a minute. There is one final thing. I did not wish to send it unless you requested it. I stared at the screen, my heart heavy. Send it. A voice memo appeared. I played it, then played it again, then a third time, needing to verify that the voice emanated from my wife, Helena's voice. If Julian begins to press for answers, I will simply weep. He is incapable of bearing a woman's tears. He will offer an apology before he even understands his own defense. Elena's voice low and furious. That is sociopathic. Helena laughed. No, that is marriage. You learn the mechanism that makes the machine function. Then the final blow. He is not a threat, Elena. He is simply decent. That is precisely why this is so effortless. I stopped the recording. The room was deathly quiet. That was the moment I ceased attempting to salvage the marriage. Not because of Elena's beauty, not because I sought an excuse to be with her, but because I finally grasped the fundamental difference between the two women. Helena had regarded my integrity and identified a flaw to be exploited. Elena had identified the same quality and jeopardized her entire social existence to shield it. My phone chimed. Elena? I am so sorry. I called her. She answered instantly. Julienne? I am not going to attempt to mend this, I said, my voice rasping. She let out a shaky exhale. I suspected that would be the outcome. It is. I looked around the dining room Helena had designed. The perfect chairs, the perfect floral arrangements, the perfect life, which I now realized had been a stage set for an audience that excluded me. If this didn't cause me pain, I admitted, I would be forced to concede that 9 years of my life were entirely hollow. Elena's voice softened. It wasn't hollow. You were authentic within it. That carries weight. I closed my eyes. Her words inflicted more damage on my composure than Helena's recordings ever could. Because my wife had conditioned me to believe my kindness was a symptom of my own inferiority. Elena, with one sentence, reframed my character as a victory. I am still legally bound to her, I said. I am aware, she whispered. But not for much longer. The line fell silent. My grip tightened on the device. Every fiber of my being yearned to articulate things I had no right to say yet, so I restrained myself. I held the boundary. That evening, I collated the evidence, printed the logs, and contacted an attorney. I waited in the living room for Helena to return. I wasn't smiling. Helena arrived at 7:28. I remember the time because I had spent the previous hour staring at the clock as if it were a talisman. The door clicked. Her heels echoed in the foyer. She called out my name with that soft, curated lilt she reserved for when she wanted the home to feel normal. I stood in the living room. On the mahogany table were 3 neat stacks of documents: the financial records, the transcripts, the photographic evidence. Helena stopped in the archway. Her expression was blank for a singular heartbeat. Then she smiled. It was the first thing she did not panic. Not remorse, but a smile. As if she had walked into a room to find a minor spill she fully expected someone else to clean. "What is the meaning of this, Julian?" she asked. "The end," I replied. Her smile sharpened. "How dramatic." "I agree." She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the papers. "Have you been excavating our financial affairs?" "Our finances," I repeated. A fascinating choice of words. Her gaze flicked to mine. That was the first fracture. I placed the hotel invoice on top of the pile. Thursdays. Her demeanor shifted, but only minutely. Helena was a master of the microcorrection. She could oscillate between wife and victim, an offended queen in less than a breath. "You had me followed?" "No." "Then who did?" I remained silent. She grasped it instantly. Elena's name hung in the air, a phantom between us. Helena laughed, a sound cold as ice. "Of course. She has desired this outcome for years," I observed her. "Desired what?" "You," she said, as if stating a fact. Poor, sensitive Julian being comforted by my lonely, self-righteous friend. She must have savored the opportunity to play the savior. That was the moment I nearly surrendered to my temper. Not because of her insults, I had grown accustomed to those, but because even now, confronted with her own betrayal, Helena's instinct was to drag Elena into the filth. "This is not about Elena," I stated. "Oh, please. It is entirely about Nathan, the legal fees, the currency, and the narrative you were fabricating about me before I even knew we were at war." Her eyes flared. "You recorded me?" Elena did. "Exactly. After you coerced her into a deception." Helena's mouth parted, then clamped shut. That silence was the most honest confession I would ever receive. I picked up a transcript. "You stated I was decent, that it was the reason I was easy to manipulate." She looked away, a fleeting movement. But I caught it. And strangely, that hurt far worse than if she had screamed, because in that momentary look away, I saw the truth. She hadn't said it in anger. She had said it because it was her honest assessment. Useful, manageable. A good man reframed by a selfish woman into an accessory. "I wanted to preserve this marriage," I said. Her eyes tracked back to mine. "I truly did. Even when you made me feel diminished. Even when you mocked me in front of strangers. Even when I lay beside you at night and felt more isolated than I had ever felt alone." For once, she didn't interrupt. "Tonight I realized there is nothing left to preserve." Helena's face hardened. "So, what? You desire a divorce? Fine. But do not pretend you are virtuous if you dash off to her." The accusation landed with precision. Because I had indeed thought of Elena throughout the day. Her voice, her trembling hands, her insistence that I was authentic, the reality that my wife had known me for 9 years and treated my integrity as a handle, while Elena had observed me from the periphery and still attempted to shield the one aspect of myself, I was beginning to find shameful. But I would not allow Helena to make that ugly. "I am not leaving because I desire Elena," I stated. Helena smirked. "I am leaving because I do not desire you." The room descended into a profound silence. That was the one statement she couldn't spin. It wasn't about jealousy, or betrayal, or a new romance. It was absolute. It was mine. By 9 o'clock, I had packed a suitcase. Helena did not weep. She attempted a performance near the staircase, her voice wavering, her eyes damp, whispering, "You are committing a catastrophic error." A week prior, I might have rushed to soothe her. But I had heard her explain exactly how she could manipulate me into apologizing before I even understood the transgression. So I watched the tears gather, and I remained motionless. That was when she finally looked terrified. Not heartbroken. Terrified. Because the mechanism no longer functioned. I stayed in a hotel by the waterfront. A sterile room, nondescript art, a vending machine humming in the hall like it was guarding state secrets. At 11:40, there was a knock. I knew who it was. I opened the door. Elena stood in the corridor, holding a paper bag and my wool scarf. "You left this behind," she said. I stared at the scarf. "You returned to the house?" "Not inside." She flung it onto the porch after sending me several creative insults. That almost made me laugh. Almost. Elena peered into the room. "Are you all right?" "No." She nodded, as if she respected the answer too much to dilute it. "I brought sustenance," she said. "You likely haven't consumed anything." That gesture broke me. Not the food, the observation. Helena would have inquired why I was being difficult. Elena brought soup and stood in a hotel corridor, as if she were uncertain if she were permitted to care this deeply. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "I realize Helena will use this against you." "I realize." "Then why are you here?" Her gaze met mine. "Because today you discovered your entire existence was constructed on deception. And I couldn't bear the thought of you sitting in a room alone." I looked at her, and the word I had been avoiding surfaced. Care, plain, inconvenient, dangerous care. I stepped aside to allow her entry. She placed the bag on the desk and remained near the threshold. "I am not here to be anything," she said quickly. "I simply wanted to ensure you had dinner and the scarf. Then I will depart." "Elena." She stopped. "You didn't dismantle my marriage." Her face tightened. "You didn't," I repeated. "You revealed the truth after Helena had already dismantled it." Her eyes became glassy. "I waited too long." "Perhaps." "So did I said. She regarded me. "I waited too long to acknowledge that kindness lacking mutual respect is not a marriage. I waited too long to stop laughing at jests that rendered me invisible. I waited too long to trust what I felt. Whenever you looked at me as if I were still a person." Her breath hitched. The atmosphere between us shifted not abruptly, but with the inevitability of a tide. I moved closer. She didn't retreat. "I am still married," I stated. "I am aware. My attorney files the motion on Monday." "I am aware." "I desire this," I said, and the words were raw. "I desire you, but I will not allow Helena to transform the first honest connection I have felt in years into something sordid." Elena's tears finally spilled over. She whispered, "Then we wait." I should have stopped there. I truly should have. But she reached for the scarf at the same moment I did, and our hands collided. This time, neither of us pulled away. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't lengthy. But it occurred. A quiet, aching fracture in the middle of all the restraint we had been attempting to maintain. When it concluded, Elena withdrew, one hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and longing. I closed my eyes, not because I regretted it, but because I didn't. That was the complexity of the situation. Elena moved toward the door. "I should depart," she whispered. I nodded. Even though every fiber of my being urged me to ask her to remain, she opened the door and paused. "I will wait," she vowed. She vowed. She left me standing in that hotel room with lukewarm soup, a folder of treachery, and the first kiss that felt less like a betrayal than the dawn of a life I was terrified to believe I deserved. Elena honored her word. That was the first thing that convinced me the future was tangible. Not the kiss. The promise. "I will wait." And she did. Monday morning, my counsel filed the separation. By Wednesday, Helena had already generated 3 distinct versions of the narrative. In one, I had become erratic and paranoid. In another, in the third, Helena was merely devastated that private marital grievances were being distorted by third parties. She posted nothing publicly. Helena was too sophisticated for that. She preferred the whisper network, carefully worded texts, luncheons with mutual acquaintances, strategic displays of vulnerability in the appropriate kitchens. But she had miscalculated one thing. Elena was not the only individual who had witnessed her. Over the subsequent month, disparate truths began to coalesce. A friend recalled Helena jesting that I was far too loyal to inspect receipts. Another confessed Helena had inquired if they would provide an alibi for a Thursday. Nathan's name ceased to be a rumor when his spouse contacted my attorney after discovering similar hotel discrepancies. That was a development I hadn't anticipated. Helena hadn't merely compromised my marriage. She had intruded upon another. The dissolution of the marriage was not cinematic. No courtroom dramatics, no cathartic confessions, merely lawyers, affidavits, financial disclosures, and the agonizingly slow humiliation of paperwork recounting the truth with more precision than people ever could. The private account was exposed, the hotel invoices surfaced, the transfer attempts were verified, and when Helena's counsel attempted to argue that I had been emotionally abusive, my attorney produced the exchanges where Helena requested that Elena perjure herself, alongside the recording where she labeled me decent enough to manipulate. Following that, the tone shifted. Helena became less the grieving wife, more the cooperative participant. It is astonishing how concrete evidence improves one's decorum. I relocated to a modest apartment across town. It featured a view of a brick facade, a refrigerator with a rhythmic mechanical click, and precisely one chair for the first fortnight. Elena visited once, only once. She arrived in the doorway with a box of kitchenware she claimed she no longer required. Though every plate was meticulously wrapped and entirely intact, she did not enter immediately. "I can leave these here," she offered. Elena. Her gaze ascended to mine. I had reflected on our kiss every hour, every day. Not as a guilt-ridden fantasy, but as a painful, unresolved longing. But I also understood that Helena was still hunting for a way to cast Elena as the antagonist. So I remained distanced. "Thank you," Elena nodded. The space between us was saturated with everything we were resisting. Then she offered a sad smile. "This is more difficult than I anticipated." "Waiting?" "No. Watching you navigate this." That statement nearly destroyed me, because Helena had dismissed my loyalty as easy. Elena treated care like a discipline, a force that required rigorous boundaries. We waited 3 months before sharing dinner alone again, not because the attraction had waned, but because we needed the beginning of us to survive the narrative people were attempting to construct around it. When the decree was finally granted, Helena retained a portion of what the law demanded, but lost the things she had attempted to hoard through performance. She didn't receive the version where I apologized. She didn't receive the ability to cast Elena as a villain. She didn't retain the circle of friends who had finally perceived the pattern clearly enough to be mortified by their own complicity. I did not celebrate. That perplexed some. But divorce, even from someone who has inflicted trauma, is a funeral for the version of yourself you once believed existed. Elena understood. On the day the decree was finalized, she didn't bring champagne. She brought dinner soup, once more, because that had apparently become our dialect. She stood in my apartment kitchen in a soft blue sweater, her hair tucked behind one ear, observing the single chair near the table. "You still possess only one chair," she noted. I was delaying commitment to furniture. It begins there, I suppose. She laughed a small, authentic sound. I hadn't heard that resonance without a shadow of sorrow attached to it in months. We dined sitting on the hardwood floor, backs pressed against the kitchen cabinetry, because the chair felt too formal, and the sofa had yet to arrive. For a time, we discussed mundane matters, her career, my apartment, the fact that Helena had purportedly joined a wellness retreat, which Elena observed was perfectly on brand for someone who required professional intervention but favored scented candles. I laughed harder than I had in years. Then the silence returned. Elena set her bowl aside. "Are you truly free now?" she inquired. I looked at her. There were myriad responses. Legally, yes. Emotionally, perhaps not entirely. Practically, I am arriving. So, I selected the only useful truth. I am sufficiently free to choose with absolute care. Her eyes softened. "And what are you choosing?" "You," I said slowly, definitively, without evasion. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat. When she reopened them, the apprehension remained, but so did the liberation. This time when I kissed her, it wasn't in a hotel room littered with wreckage. It was in my unfinished kitchen, with the legal decree finalized and no shadows of deception standing between us. That kiss felt like a genesis, an authentic one. We proceeded gradually, slower than our desire demanded, faster than our fear preferred. Elena sacrificed friendships, Some because they prioritized Helena's polished mythology, others because Elena could no longer respect individuals who required every truth to remain socially convenient. I sacrificed the life I had curated to remain reliable for someone who never respected me. But in the void left by that loss, something more resilient began to take root. Elena and I walked, then dined, then spent weekends together. She discovered I was abysmal at selecting furniture, but highly proficient at assembly. I discovered she wept at documentaries about rescue animals and pretended her reactions were mere allergies. She still apologized occasionally for disclosing the truth so late. I still reminded her that she disclosed it just in time. 2 years later, I proposed to her on a rain-drenched evening, parked outside the same desolate pharmacy where she had first articulated the truth. She stared at the ring, then at the dark, hollow windows of the storefront, then at me. "Here?" she whispered. "The most harrowing night of your existence commenced here." "No," I replied. "The truth commenced here." Elena began to weep, but not with the fragility she had displayed in the hotel corridor. "From the release," she said. "Yes," I answered. Years later, people occasionally inquire how we came to be together. Elena always glances at me before responding, because the narrative was never simplistic. I typically state that she provided me with the truth when deception would have been significantly easier, and Elena will add that I chose to be liberated before I chose to be with her. Both are factual. But the deeper truth is this: I didn't fall in love with my wife's best friend because she provided me with an escape. I fell in love because, in the most profound ruin of my life, she refused to permit me to remain alone with a lie. What path would you have taken if your spouse's closest friend asked for a private audience solely to reveal the deception your marriage had been concealing? And has anyone ever shielded you from a lie, even when the truth demanded a heavy personal cost? Share your perspective in the comments. If this narrative resonated, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next installment.